Hello everyone, welcome to another Risky Business News sponsor interview. Today I have with me Feross Aboukhadijeh from Socket. G'day Feross, how are you?
Doing good, Tom. Glad to be here.
Socket makes a system for inspecting the security of the open source packages that you might be using or might be interested in using. And in the wake of some of the problems with the National Vulnerability Database in recent months, I thought it'd be interesting to talk about how in, I guess, air quotes, traditional software packages, there's this whole system of tracking vulnerabilities through CVEs. That information gets enriched. Vendors pick up that information and use what version, how important is it, and use that to try and keep a handle on the whole mess that is the world of the internet and software. But my understanding is that none of those mechanisms really exist in open source package registries. Is that right?
So I would say that we care about more than vulnerabilities when we talk about, is our open source software and our open source components, are they secure? We care about whether the packages have backdoors, whether they're malicious, whether there's unwanted code. We've seen all kinds of different threats over the last few months and years, everything from political protest, what people have dubbed protestware, to malicious install scripts. We've seen cryptocurrency miners, we've seen ransomware, we've seen XC utils, which was a very sophisticated state-sponsored backdoor in an open source project. So there's been all kinds of different threats, and unfortunately, not all of those make it into the NVD, and therefore they don't all make it into the different vulnerability scanning software that most companies are using. And so while the NVD is still useful and while vulnerability scanning tools are still useful, they're just not equal to the challenge of managing the risk from software supply chain attacks. So I think we're seeing is rather than focusing on just remediating vulnerabilities, to really manage the modern risk of software supply chain attacks that come from open source, we actually have to shift our focus to malware and all the different modern attack techniques that attackers are using in open source package registries.
Right. So are you saying that if something like a backdoor would not get a CVE number?
So we see sometimes those do get CVE numbers, but it's not consistent. It's not repeatable. In fact, the vast majority of the time, I would estimate 90 to 95% of the time, we don't see a CVE number being issued for malicious packages. And I think it's shockingly high.
Do you know why that is?
I'd love to get an actual definitive reason from the folks that run it, but my understanding is that the NVD, it's right there in the name, right? National Vulnerability Database. And So it's really focused on vulnerabilities, accidental security bugs in software. It's not really meant for malware and for malicious code. It's not meant for viruses.
Right.
It's just that that's not what they track. And so the risk that creates for companies and security teams, it is when you have a package that is affected by a backdoor or that has malware in it, there isn't really a central repository where you can go to find out if you're using such a package. And we'll see open source registries like NPM and PyPy and Maven Central just remove packages, and there's no CVE published. There's no way to find out, whether you're using one of those packages or whether you might have already replicated a package that's malicious into your own internal mirror, your own Artifactory instance or whatever you might be using to host packages internally.
Right. So they just remove it. You've got no idea even why they removed it. Do they remove them for other reasons than badness? So it could be that there's a benign reason that it's been removed and you've got no idea whether it's you're fine, there's just some minor problem, or you're in deep doo-doo.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So when packages are removed, it can be for a number of reasons. We see, obviously, malicious code is a big reason, but there's also accidental secrets getting published inside packages. Right. That'll be a reason. There's a ton of copyright infringement that goes on these registries. People literally host movies, full-length movies on NPM. So that's a big source of removals. It's a free file host, right? You can run one command and they'll just host, your packages of multi-gigabyte file size, and it's on a CDN. So you're obviously going to see a ton of abuse there. We see SEO spam. So there's lots of different reasons. So it's not necessarily the case that something is removed and it's malware, but usually if it's removed, you probably don't want to use it and it's something you want to know about.
Right. So once it's removed, there's this uncertainty that you can't eliminate currently. And so the best practice would be to get rid of it. Like, why carry risk, I guess is what you're saying.
Yeah. Although I'll say the flip side is, right, like a lot of the reason why companies run internal package mirrors is because they want to build robustness. They don't want their builds and their software release processes to be dependent upon the uptime of PyPy, which is a volunteer run project. And so that's why they do that replication. And so the whole point of those mirrors is that they want to keep packages around if they're ever used in the company, even after they're potentially removed from the public registry. And so you have this inherent conflict with the whole purpose of these mirrors is to keep your builds and your processes running and to have a record of those packages. But you also don't want to continue hosting a malicious package in your mirror and then providing that to your developers when it's already been removed publicly. And so the public is actually safer than your team is because you continue to host the malware. So, that's where Socket can help. I mean, we have lists of these things and you can connect it up to your internal package host, whether it's Artifactory or whatever you use. And we can help, see if you're using any of that type of stuff.
But how do you help? I mean, if you're not getting a sort of official vouched for, here's a piece of bad malicious stuff through a database or through a number, are you just, I don't know, how are you doing that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Socket, we clone every single open source package that exists in all the major ecosystems. So NPM, PyPy, Go, Maven Central, Ruby gems, etc. And we replicate those packages in real time. So that means whenever there's a new package published in any of those ecosystems, within seconds, we already have a copy of it. And then we do a full source code analysis of those packages, starting with a static analysis. We look at the maintainer behavior and history. So like, what's their track record? Is this a new author? Have they ever published code before? We look at the dependency graph and the trustworthiness of that graph. And then we also look at the source code itself using an LLM. And that actually is pretty great at identifying threats that we don't have static rules for. So we'll often catch data exfiltration, we'll catch obfuscated code, hidden behavior that isn't meant to be inside those packages. And then we put all that into a feed that we have a human team of security researchers and experts that review that and produce a clean data signal for our customers. So with that whole system, we're actually able to identify right now around 100 supply chain attacks every week across the ecosystems that we monitor. And since we started the company, that's already added up now to I think we're crossing the 16,000 malicious package threshold. So there's this stuff is being published constantly to the registries. I think that the numbers boggle the mind. I don't think there's a general awareness of just how much, frankly, garbage code there is on these registries. I mean, it's straight up a public wiki where anyone can post stuff, right? It's basically what it is. So,
right. So presumably most of these packages affect a small number of people. Is that right? Because I do hear of occasionally when there's large ones, but if it's that many, there's got to be a lot of, I guess, diffuse harm.
That's correct. Yeah. So if you just take the sheer numbers, like most of them have probably under 50 downloads. So you're absolutely correct. That doesn't mean that they're not a potential threat, even for the ones that aren't downloaded, because they'll often typo squat, meaning they're registering names that are one letter off from another package. And so if you ever make a mistake, they're just sitting there waiting for you to, typo your package installation. And so one of the cool things that we have at Socket is we actually have, we call it Safe NPM or Safe PyPy, which is basically a wrapper that wraps the CLI that the developer uses. And when they go to type npm install, if they do typo that installation, we can actually step in and just like you get on a Google search, we can say, did you really mean to install this package that has 50 downloads when there's one that's one letter different that actually has 20 million downloads, and we can kind of save them from themselves there.
Right. So you're sort of intercepting the typo squatting. You're typo squatting on typo squatting.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. We're sort of, we're watching the install, and then we do that we can also do that for any of the other threats that we detect. So, obviously if it's a malicious package or if it violates company policy in one way or another, whether it's anything from license restrictions to, hey, this package actually collects telemetry off the system. We see a lot of packages now collecting telemetry for maintainer purposes. Like, they'll just collect the IP of who installed their code, the host name of the system. It's not necessarily malicious, but they're just pulling pieces of system information so they can identify who's using their code. And pretty much none of our customers want that in their code bases. It's
Right.
just risk, and so being able to call that out, and then especially if there's instructions that they provide on how to disable that functionality, we can provide that too during that installation process and help the developer.
Yeah, right. So when we started this interview, I thought you were going to argue that package registries should have some sort of, reporting mechanism for vulnerable or malicious packages. But now that I've heard what you say Socket does, surely you'd argue they should just stay the same and you should all just use Socket.
Well, I think that we're actually happy to collaborate with registries, and if anyone who works at NPM, which is now owned by GitHub, or the volunteers that run PyPy and the other registries want to work with us, I would be happy to work with them and provide our data feeds to them. We do actually report everything that we identify to the registries and get that code taken down to protect the community. But
Right.
we usually see a bit of a lag time there, anything from days to weeks, just because they're often run by volunteers. And so, today the best way to protect yourself is to use a tool like Socket, which can, provide that added layer of security across all the different registries. And then I'll just add one other note too, which is kind of interesting, I think, which is that there's cases where even if the registry were to partner with Socket and we help them take down everything we've identified as malicious right away and provide that data to people, there is this kind of gray area of packages that we're starting to see more of, where they're effectively malicious from a company's perspective, but for whatever reason, they're still live on the registries. I can give you a really concrete example. This one's from about a year ago, where a maintainer wanted to protest the war in Ukraine. So they added code into their package that would embed itself into the front end of your website, and that client-side JavaScript, when it ran, it would check your time zone. And if you were in a certain range of time zones, mostly in Eastern Europe, then it would pop open a new tab in your browser, taking you to their website to basically sign a petition. Now, that doesn't sound that bad, right? But the thing is, like, this package was really widely used, 600,000 weekly downloads. It was a popular library used to basically backfill functionality for older browsers. And so this was used in a lot of apps that need to support like old browsers, which, you can imagine, like, that's banks and those types of organizations. And so we saw this get bundled into people's front end. And little do they know, because they might not have developers in those time zones, they're actually running this code on their customers, on their users' devices, and it looks like they're hacked when you come to the website, because
Right.
you're getting redirected.
Yep.
But so it's sort of an image issue, and for whatever reason, in that instance, GitHub decided that isn't actually something that they want to take down, that they don't consider to be malicious, even
Right.
though I didn't talk to a single company that's okay with that in their code base. And so that package remains live on NPM today. And so you need, third parties like Socket to come in and sort of say, okay, yes, this is technically not considered malicious by GitHub or by NPM, but actually nobody wants this. So we flag that as, we call protestware or potentially unwanted behavior present in the package. And we can stop that from getting in the first place, or identify it if it's already, used in any of your repositories.
Yeah, that's an interesting example. I do remember hearing about it, but I didn't realize that it remained live. And
Yeah, the package is called Event Source Polyfill, if anyone wants to take a look at it. It's one of the older versions that they have up there today and still hosted there. So that's the kind of thing, I think, that where you ask yourself, like, okay, what should we do about this as an industry, right? And I would argue there should be disclosure, right? There should be, the CDE system is nice because everyone is using it in some ways, right? We're all hooked into it. We all have, we've done a pretty good job as an industry getting adoption of that data source. So the path forward here might be to put this type of data into the NVD and sort of expand its scope. Although, I don't know all the, there may be other considerations that, we need to think about there, but I just think it's such a widely deployed system. So it might be the path of least resistance to get this information that we have into more people's hands.
Feross Aboukhadijeh, CEO and founder of Socket, thanks a lot for another fascinating interview.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.